Good evening. Welcome. My name is Annie Wilson. I'm proud to be the programming supervisor for the FirstOntario Performing Arts Centre. Today is National Housing Day, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to a panel discussion that we're going to have this evening on the topic. To begin, I would like to acknowledge that our home is on the shared traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and many other Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We are sincerely grateful and respect the original and continued stewards of this land. And we are reminded that we too are stewards of this land and of each other in our community. We also acknowledge that Black, Indigenous, people of color, and 2S LGBTQIA+ peoples have been marginalized for centuries and more. It is our collective responsibility to take action for a better world that's free from oppression, discrimination, and racism. The PAC is working actively in our community to bring our community together through the arts and through important conversations like these that bring us to a place of mutual understanding, empathy, and respect. I'm very pleased to be here today to welcome you to a panel discussion as a part of National Housing Day that explores the housing crisis in Niagara, and it's brought to us by the Niagara Poverty Reduction Network, the United Way Niagara, and us here at the FirstOntario Performing Arts Centre. I just had an opportunity to watch Push the film this afternoon in anticipation for this conversation, and I must say, I was sharing with our panelists before we went on the air tonight, I was really shaken by some of the staggering realities around the real estate market, around vacancy rates and affordability. So we are in for a really rich conversation this evening. I would like to now welcome Jennifer Gauthier. She's Vice Chair of the Niagara Poverty Reduction Network, and she will be hosting this evening's panel. Just one moment, I'm bringing her into the stream and I'm removing myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie, for your wonderful opening remarks and for hosting us this evening on National Housing Day. I would like to first take a moment to recognize this evening's sponsors, the FirstOntario Performing Arts Centre, Niagara Poverty Reduction Network, the Film House, and United Way Niagara. I am pleased to welcome each of you to a live virtual panel discussion about the housing crisis globally and in our own local community. We hope you enjoyed the pre-screening of Push leading up to today, which is National Housing Day. Housing is a cornerstone of sustainable and inclusive communities. Each year, National Housing Day is held on November 22nd. It's a day to recognize the important work done by housing partners across Canada to improve access to housing for everyone in Canada. This year, COVID-19 has reminded us the importance of access to safe and affordable housing. Some of those hit hardest by the pandemic are our most vulnerable populations. This includes people experiencing or at risk of homelessness, and people living in group housing, such as seniors, women and children fleeing domestic violence, and people with disabilities. The Black, Indigenous, and people of color and LGBTQ2S communities have also been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, and it has exposed the fact that they continue to face unique challenges in accessing safe, affordable, and equitable housing. Now, more than ever, National Housing Day is an opportunity to reflect on the work that still needs to be done. As our communities recover from the pandemic, we need to ensure that everyone in Canada has access to affordable and equitable housing. For me, our presence here tonight just demonstrates not only our shared interest in this issue, but also our commitment to responding to it. The Niagara Poverty Reduction Network works to reduce the effects of poverty through education, collaboration, and advocacy. Niagara Poverty Reduction Network is invested in a collective response to address issues that impact people living on a low income. Access to safe, affordable, and adequate housing is one of those important issues. We are pleased to be part of a constructive community conversation and thank you all for being with us here tonight to share in this important dialogue. I'd like to now introduce our moderator, Tamara Coleman Lowry, Director of Community Impact at United Way Niagara.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm really pleased to be able to participate in this very important panel discussion this evening. Housing First and support services remain a very large priority investment for the United Way. We recognize the significant value that these programs and connections to community have for our most vulnerable populations. They are critical to ensuring that everyone in our community has equitable access to a safe and affordable home. Last year alone, United Way investments helped more than 3,200 people secure and maintain their home. We can and need to do better, and I really hope that tonight's dialogue helps us to work towards impactful solutions. Aside from moderating our panel this evening, I have the pleasure of introducing you to this evening's panelists. Christina Thomas is a community leader in the Western Hill neighborhood of St. Catharines. She's an active member of the Reichert Volunteer Committee, a tenant-led neighborhood association striving to make a difference that creates a safe space for residents to learn new life skills, make new friendships, enjoy community dinners, and voice tenant concerns. Part of the group's mission is erasing the stigma attached to living in a subsidized housing by actively displaying the gifts and talents of people who live in Reichert. Christina recently went back to school to be able to serve the community as a community development social worker. She currently works for Out of the Cold as a shelter attendant, volunteers at New Hope Church, and was one of 6 women chosen to participate in the Seat at a Table, a political mentorship program initiated by some amazing women leaders throughout the city of St. Catharines. Next, we have Elizabeth Zimmerman. Elizabeth has worked for over 25 years in the nonprofit human services sector, the last 13 years as executive director of the YWCA Niagara region, a nonprofit organization working with homeless women and their families, providing emergency shelter, transitional supportive housing, ongoing support services, and advocacy. Her deep understanding of the importance of addressing the issues of poverty and the need for quality support systems to minimize the long-term impact of systemic inequalities has positioned the YWCA as a leader in addressing barriers with a women's focused lens among government and community agencies. Her expertise in the areas of poverty and homelessness is sought out, and she is actively involved in committees throughout the Niagara region to help raise awareness and implement change. A valued guest speaker, Elizabeth has worked hard to raise awareness around the issues of poverty and its impacts specific to women and children. She brings passion to everything she does, and as a native of the Niagara region, she has a strong connection within the community and is dedicated to improving the quality of life for all. Finally, we have Jeff Sinclair. He is the project lead for the Niagara region's 10-year Housing and Homelessness Action Plan, which provides a collaborative system approach for addressing housing and homelessness needs in response to local needs. Jeff holds a Bachelor of Business in International Commerce and Global Development from Niagara College and has provided immense leadership for local initiatives related to community leadership, social entrepreneurship, and poverty reduction. So we'll get started with our panel questions this evening. There's a lot to unpack from the film. It was certainly inspiring to follow Leilani, a woman from Canada, who took the lead and investigated what's happening to housing all around the world for the United States. Housing is certainly a hot topic here in Niagara, and we're excited to learn from our panelists tonight.
I'm going to do that from my phone. Okay.
Let's start by getting your initial impressions from the film. We're going to start with Elizabeth. What did you take away from the film and what struck you the most? Elizabeth, are you able to hear me? Maybe we'll start with Jeff. Jeff, are you able to start? What struck you the most about the film?
Sure. There's a few things that really sprung to mind reflecting on the film after it was done. One of the things is that communities and economies have different stakeholders in them, of course. And one of the things I think that throughout the film is trying to find a way to support the different stakeholders, like the finance sector, housing development, to succeed at their interests without doing harm to other stakeholders. And I think government plays a key role in mediating that, as we see in the film. And government is sort of looked at perhaps to answer some of those questions and make a balance between those different interests. I think also another piece of it is that we all need to try to understand the possible negative impacts that could happen at arm's length because of the ways that we engage in our community. An example in the film is retirement plans that are investing in housing that are leading to the housing to become unaffordable for the very people in there who actually could be people that are on that retirement plan. And so I think it's really important that we consider the different pieces of how we engage in our communities and what possible negative impacts they could be. Another example that isn't so much in the film, but we do see in Niagara, is NIMBYism. So, opposition to certain populations or certain types of development that would support certain populations in our community. And we see opposition in our neighborhoods when those developments are going to take place.
Thanks. Christina, I'm not sure if you wanted to maybe comment on what you took away from the film most.
I think when they were talking in the film about companies coming in and buying up different buildings from foreign areas, stuff like that, and driving up the price and making it not affordable for other people to live in certain areas and pushing people out. I think that the displacement is a lot of things that people don't really realize. And I see that a lot for myself because I was one of the people who've been displaced just because of affordability in areas that you're not able to live in. Like, I'm not even originally from the Niagara region. I'm originally from the Toronto area. And because I couldn't afford to live in that area, I've had to move so many times with my family from the Peel region to London, Ontario, to where I am now. And the displacement with families having to move to so many different areas just to be able to find affordable housing, it causes trauma and it causes, the abandonment feelings, and you have to relocate your whole life and adapt to where you have to live. And it's a lot of people don't even realize this is why. So I really address like a feel for those situations and understand that.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I know we lost Elizabeth, so I might come back to her on this one, but I wanted to focus a bit on the discussion that usually happens around affordable housing. And so it always seems to be about building more affordable housing to help address homelessness. And so for the viewers tuning in tonight, what is affordable housing, and does it only benefit people experiencing homelessness? And Jeff, I thought we might start with you.
Okay. Thanks, Tamara. So yeah, affordable housing, it's interesting. In the work that I've been involved with at the region, it comes up quite a bit that people at large in the community, different stakeholders don't necessarily have a common definition of affordable housing. So one of the things we did was to look through the different definitions, how they're interpreted, and come to a definition that would support all of the work that we're doing. So a lot of this comes from the provincial definitions and the definitions that are in use federally as well. And so I guess the first point is that affordable housing is a broader issue than homelessness. So homelessness, of course, is always about housing, but homelessness is about more than just housing. And a lack of affordable housing is a broader issue. So it affects more people than just those who are experiencing homelessness in our communities. An important group that we need to consider when we're talking about affordable housing is those people who are working in our communities at lower wage or seasonal employment, who may be particularly vulnerable when housing prices are increasing. We won't be able to retain people in Niagara to work in the industries that we have if they can't afford housing to live here. So affordable housing is defined as spending less than 30% of a household's gross income, so before tax income, on housing needs. And for renters, that would be rent plus utilities. In recent years, we've seen landlords remove utilities costs from the rent and have those separate. And so it's important to include those so that we don't get a false impression that rents are dropping simply because one of the costs has been overlooked. And for owners, that would include your mortgage, property tax, condominium fees if you have them, also the cost of utilities. So for a household to be considered living in affordable housing broadly, that would mean those costs are less than 30% of the household.
And maybe Jeff, just for the folks, and I hate to put you on the spot, for folks who are joining us tonight, do we have what percentage in Niagara, I guess on average, would be spending more than 30% of their income on their rent?
Yeah, so what we do have, we don't have that specifically handy. I've been working with our planning department, Niagara Regional Housing, to get data that we can use to measure our progress on providing affordable housing in Niagara. And so what we do is we measure core housing need, which is mainly to do with affordability, but it also considers whether a household is housed in the right size of housing. So do you have enough bedrooms, for example, for all the members of your household to be in, or are people that probably shouldn't be, bunking together, bunking in bedrooms, like, a parent with a child living in a 1-bedroom unit, that would be considered too small. The other piece is for housing is the unit in disrepair and needing major repairs. So that would be like, does the roof leak? Are there major electrical problems? That kind of thing. And then, of course, there's affordability. Is the household spending more than 30% or more of their income on the housing? And if any of those are true, and the household does not have enough income that they can just find something else that does meet their needs in the community, then we would consider them in core need. And in Niagara, 12.8% of households are considered to be in core housing need, which is about between 23 and 24,000 households.
Thank you. Elizabeth, I know we lost you briefly, but I wanted to just go back to the question I posed to Jeff and Christina originally. And so there was a lot to unpack from the film. And it was definitely inspiring to hear, this woman take the lead and investigate what's happening globally around the world. And so housing remains a really hot topic, of course, in Niagara. And so what, from your perspective, did you take away from the film and what struck you the most?
I think that finance, and I can't think of the proper term now, the financializing of housing is something that I think is more insidious than we realize. And I think about some of the, I had the opportunity to attend a conference in Vancouver a couple of years ago, and from my hotel room, I could see several condominiums buildings, and you could see very clearly there were a lot of empty condos because there was never any lights in them. And I think about that risk here in Niagara as we see more and more developments, or, the changing over of rental markets to condos, all these kinds of different things. And I think we have to be very conscious of that. I think we need to be really careful to ensure that we are protecting the housing that we have, and coming from that lens of, everyone has the right to housing. So I think that was probably one of the most powerful statements for me, but I also think that we have to just talk about the overall affordability of housing and the cost increases that we've seen in the last 3 to 4 years, and how many more people are housing is becoming less and less affordable for.
Definitely. Being a Niagara region resident myself and born and raised, I think it struck me harder than I thought it would, the financialization of the Niagara region, especially, perhaps areas that are considered, very nice to visit and vacation. And thank you, Elizabeth. So next up, presumably all of us participating in this discussion tonight are joining, from home due to the pandemic. And so why is housing so important, and is it a human right? And Christina, I thought I would start with you. Okay. Why is housing so important to you, and is it a human right?
Well, to answer your first question, I think housing is important because it provides shelter from the elements, safety for our loved ones, space for our belongings, and a place where memories are made. But if you miss 1 or 2 payments, you easily find out how vital it is to your everyday life. However, housing is also important because individuals who are experiencing homelessness particularly the vulnerable ones who are lacking permanent housing, meaning these individuals, they cannot effectively self-isolate and they cannot practice proper safety precautions like you and I, especially during the pandemic that we're facing now because of their circumstances. They're exposed to increasing everyday risk, and they cannot mitigate these risks because of lack of infrastructure and supply to maintain their health and to keep it away from the public at large, as well as maintaining the health that they have now because of pre-existing health conditions. So it's a very scary situation right now without housing for themselves. But housing is also scary for the situation with COVID and people losing their jobs with employment and not being able to maintain the housing that they do have as it is.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If you have anything more to add, feel free.
Oh, sorry. And I was just going to answer your second question about, is it a right? About it being a right, well, I was recently looking on the Human Rights Commission because I didn't really realize it was a right. I thought it should be a right, but I didn't know it was a right until actually I looking into it after this movie inspired me to kind of look it up. And I realized that it's an international law, and it's a right that on the Ontario Human Rights Commission, it beautifully worded it, and I completely agree with it. It says adequate housing is essential to one's dignity, safety, inclusion, and ability to contribute to the fabric of neighborhoods and society. Without appropriate housing, it's not often possible to keep employment and recover from mental illness or other disabilities, often to integrate into community, escape physical or emotional violence, or keep custody of children, which is amazing because it's so true. But without all of these things, which we just lack or think of on a daily basis, we just think we need a roof over our head. It's that simple. We can't progress in life, and the courts will not let you keep your children without having a house over your head. It's hard to escape addiction and abuse and all of these things without housing. So it is a right. Thank you.
I completely agree. Thank you. Elizabeth or Jeff, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything to Christina's comments.
So I guess the only thing I wanted to add, well, I guess two things. One is, yeah, absolutely. The United Nations has declared that it is a human right, and Canada at the federal level has signed on and agreed to that human right. So what that means then is that the provincial government, municipal government are also responsible to enact that human right and support it. So how that plays out in our communities, of course, happens in a number of different ways. Doesn't mean we just snap our fingers and it's done. There's still challenges. There's people experiencing homelessness, which then would be seen as a violation of that human right, unless that homelessness is, very brief and non-recurring. So, and then the other piece I just wanted to mention, one of the things in homelessness services in Niagara region that reflects that human right is the shift to a housing first approach to helping people exit chronic homelessness. Mm-hmm. So, the idea there is mainly that people don't earn the right back to housing. We don't support people to learn skills and learn how to maybe, be good in their housing, and then sort of reward them with access to an apartment or something like that. But that actually we flip that around, and the very first thing is to try to, as rapidly as possible, get someone access to permanent housing, and then provide additional supports in order to help that person to stay in their housing.
Thanks, Jeff. Elizabeth, I'm not sure if you wanted to perhaps add some comments.
Well, I think, it's been covered really well by Christine and Jeff. I think that the only thing I can add is just from my own experience with the YWCA and seeing the consequence of homelessness, that absolutely it is a human right, that we cannot self-actualize. We cannot, do anything without having a home. And so absolutely, I would agree. And that the consequences of homelessness are very, very, they have an incredible impact on people's lives.
They definitely do. Thank you. So let's maybe step back a bit now. We're nearing the end of 2020, one of the most challenging years that many of us, I think, have faced and in our community. And so it's been a very strange, difficult year of disruption, chaos, change, loss. And so, of course, the word crisis comes to mind. And so, is this a housing crisis that we're experiencing? And how did we get here? Elizabeth, I'm wondering what your thoughts are. Is this a crisis? What has changed? What stayed the same for the folks that you're working?
I think that the crisis began before the pandemic. I think that we've been experiencing crisis already for the last couple of years. When we saw a dramatic increase in the cost of housing, it had almost immediate impact on the cost of the rental market. And within the homelessness system, we jumped from, in our organization, from an average of 80% occupancy to 110 to 120% occupancy. When we see housing wait lists for Niagara Regional Housing up to 13 to 18 years, I think that already are the indicators. When you, as Jeff mentioned earlier, when you have 23 households in Niagara who are in core housing need, these are all examples of the fact that we are in a crisis situation. We see constantly the increase in the rental market. Incomes are not keeping up with it. We are seeing more that, the spectrum is increasing too. This is having impact on young families trying to get into their first home. So we are absolutely at a time, to me, it's a pivotal time in terms of what kind of decisions we make moving forward as to how we are going to address these issues. So yes, as far as I'm concerned, we are in a housing crisis.
Thanks. Jeff, Christina, I'm not sure if you wanted to chime in with any comments or feedback.
I think that she's right.
Yes, definitely. So how are people being affected by this unaffordable housing crisis? And Christina, I know that, as a local resident, someone who's working really hard to create change, you're supporting people experiencing homelessness in your work, and you're voicing your concerns. You're a community leader in your neighborhood. Tell us about your experiences. How are people in your community being affected by this crisis? And what do you want folks that are listening in tonight to know?
Okay, thank you. I think that as Elizabeth and Jeff have already stated, and the film does a great job of illustrating, times are really rough. Things have been increasing as a result of COVID, but they've already been rough these last couple of years. In the shelters, we are over capacity for the number of people coming in due to homelessness. An example of which right now, it's not just like the first time it's snowing right here in St. Catharines, Niagara, but we're already at over capacity. We're at the numbers are 70 to 4 staff and maybe 1 security guard. It's a lot of people out there who are in need of housing. But and in the communities, a lot of people, you used to just see them downtown, but now we're seeing them actually in our community, sleeping on park benches inside of our community or in the community itself. A lot of people might think that, oh my gosh, our neighborhoods are now overcrowded with homeless people, but they're doing what they need to do to find shelter and find security. And it's sad, but it's a reflection of what's going on. But I want to thank programs like social housing and services like the shelter and Niagara Regional Housing in regards to programs that get people housing, because they're regaining people their dignity and they're thriving in communities once again. However, I want to highlight the fact that it's important to note that the work doesn't end there, that once we do get people housed, we need to continue the work, which is programs and services that encourage them to go and be the best that they can be with their personal growth and development. Part of the community and the group that I serve, what they do is they go out and they teach the tenants in the community employability skills. We offer community dinners, and that encourages inclusiveness within the tenants that live in the community, so that they now are getting to know one another and they get out of their houses so that they don't feel self-isolated. We have a community garden, and that's also run through different services like the Niagara region and partnerships with other community organizations. So they learn how to self-sustain and grow vegetables for themselves. It also lessens their costs of growing vegetables and having to budget, right? So things like that, we need to encourage these kind of things so that they know how to do things for themselves. And these kind of skills and resources are going to help them further themselves in the future. The other thing that I wanted to address is when you do these kind of things, such as self-advocacy and learning, it's important to somebody like myself, because as myself going through this transition, I once was homeless. So I can speak on behalf of the person who's gone through the change of going from homeless to housed to living in the community and seeing the rise. And going through it, I definitely see the effects of the housing changes and the crisis, because what I viewed as living in social housing is that it was supposed to be a temporary situation. You're supposed to get housed, you're supposed to better yourself and move on and transition into home ownership one day. That's supposed to be the dream. But if you're seeing the dream and you get yourself educated and you're supposed to get out there and take this education and everything that you're doing and become better and successful and go out there, but then there's no market for you to actually obtain this home because it's not affordable for you, then, you know, where do you go from there? A lot of people are now frozen in fear or can't afford to move on. So now they're stuck in the housing that they're in. And part of us making a solution for other people as well in housing is us leaving housing and giving opportunities for other people to come in by taking ourselves out of the waiting list and lessening the waiting list for other people to move in. That's another solution that we can do on our end to help, is by leveling up and moving on and letting other people come in. But we can't do that if we can't move on to the next step without affordable housing for us on the next end, is what I'm trying to say. And the result of that is the affordable housing not being available, with other companies coming in, foreign companies coming in, when they're trying to build new projects in housing for affordable housing, them not wanting to be building it, the construction workers not wanting to build it because condos and other big luxury buildings are more better for them to build because it's more affordable for them, for their pockets, because it makes more money in dollars and cents for them to build rather than community housing because it's cheaper and they're not going to want to build that, things like that. So when it comes to people wanting to change and level up, we need to see that the dream still exists for people like myself to move on and to better themselves and do other things, because the fear is crippling people in housing. One, because they can't afford to move out. Two, because there's nothing to look forward to better tomorrow. And we need to change that. The transition to move from social housing. I need to be able to show my children that there are better opportunities for them and that there is something to attain for a better tomorrow for my children. One, because I am a minority. I'm a double minority. I'm a Black person. I'm a single mother. I'm a Black single mother. And I need to aspire to better things to show my children, because our children are our future and our children are watching.
Thank you, Christina. I think that was so well said. As a fellow single mother, I appreciate what, you know, we have all gone through. And I think you're right. It's very hard to look at your future when it's such a, I mean, it's a crisis, right? And how do you move along that continuum if you're in fear of where do you go next? It's really hard. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's so valuable and important. The Niagara Poverty Reduction Network, which is one of our presenting partners this night, does really important anti-poverty work in Niagara, mostly around public education and advocacy. And so we decided to co-host this event tonight with the Performing Arts Centre and the United Way, because obviously housing is a really important issue in Niagara, and we don't see it going away very, very soon. But in spite of the challenges, we're trying to find solutions every day. And so I'm hoping Jeff might talk to us a bit about, you know, how can we turn things around and what are we currently doing to prevent this from getting worse?
Okay, so easy question. So I guess one of the things I want to comment on you know, what Christina said, you know, it was really brilliant. And you've pointed out one of the main challenges we have with our 10-year housing and homelessness action plan is, you know, we do need to address affordable housing. And, you know, I have the great pleasure of working with some amazing colleagues at Niagara Regional Housing who are working to build more housing and to do some great stuff in the community for people who have very low incomes and would need a rent geared to income type situation. But you also Christine also pointed out another important piece, which is that middle market, that lower end of market that's not community housing. It's not that type of housing market, but it's just really affordable, whether that's for young families starting out, a first home, whether it's for older adults who are looking to downsize, sell a home and get something that they can afford and save a little money, off of the proceeds of the larger house maybe they raised a family in. People in Niagara Regional Housing who want to move out and find their own place and start owning a home. We have a lot of challenge in Niagara with that missing piece of the market. And so the gap in order to jump is quite high. And we have the data that shows that there really isn't a lot of housing. I have right here, when we're looking at housing for the range of about, $50,000 to $80,000, $85,000 incomes for a household, the market could supply that on its own. It doesn't really need incentives and that, but we haven't seen it being provided. So one of the things that we need to do is work on policies and incentives that would support, just the middle market. So to answer the question, Tamara, sorry for the little divergence there, but to answer the question, there's three main areas of work that I think are going quite well. And I'm mostly going to talk about affordable housing. The project that I manage at Niagara Region is both affordable housing and also related to homelessness. But here I'm just going to talk about affordable housing. There's three main areas of work that go into this. So one, which is often overlooked, but it's extremely important when you're looking at government and systems, is preparing and having the sort of environment in which affordable housing can be built and affordable housing happens. It doesn't just happen on the sheer willpower of a nonprofit or a charity or a private developer who says, I'm going to build affordable housing, because there's a ton of policies and other things that they have to navigate through in order to build. The second thing is that we do need to maintain our current supply of affordable housing. That's not really an exciting, sexy thing to talk about. But Niagara Regional Housing and its partners have thousands and thousands of units of affordable housing, of community housing in Niagara, and we have to make sure that we keep that. So everyone loves to put the shovel in the ground and see a brand new building, but it's not very helpful if we build 100 units and then we lose 200 units. And then the third piece is that we do need to create new affordable housing. So I guess I'll just talk about some of the things that I think are really noteworthy and exciting. So first of all, kudos to Regional Council. It's pretty exciting, I think, and I don't know how many people actually know this, but Regional Council in this term has put housing and homelessness as a priority. They've endorsed the updated Housing and Homelessness Action Plan, but they also have a council priority project that's specific to creating affordable housing. So I think that's pretty awesome. We're also working with the planners at the region and the planners at the local municipalities. There's going to be a new regional official plan that will be coming out in 2021. So that's not too far away. It's going to be linked to the 10-year Housing and Homelessness Action Plan, and it's going to actually acknowledge and have some affordable housing components and metrics in it. So that's pretty exciting that the official plan will acknowledge and have definitions and targets related to affordable housing. We've got some really good data that we've done in partnership with the Canadian Centre for Economic Analysis, and that project was led by Niagara Region and Niagara Regional Housing. Niagara Regional Housing, of course, is also a huge player here, doing some really exciting and innovative work. And one of the things they're working on right now is an affordable housing master plan. So that plan will also look at the assets and the opportunities locally in order to improve the way we invest in community housing. And then on the homeless side, I will mention one thing. Niagara is a member of Built for Zero, which is a national change movement to end chronic homelessness. And we have an ambitious goal right now of reducing chronic homelessness with our community partners by 20% by April of 2021. So then Niagara Regional Housing is working to maintain their current housing supply. They've got some really interesting stuff they're working on to maintain and address the repair needs of our housing stock. The federal and provincial governments have not invested a lot of money in the last couple decades, And so what we have is an older stock for community housing, and it needs to be kept up. And Niagara Regional Housing is also working to reduce the number of units that we lose, because when these federal or provincial agreements end, housing operators no longer have to work with Niagara Regional Housing. And so Niagara Regional Housing is doing a great job of trying to make sure that when those agreements end, that people will continue to connect those opportunities and that housing to community housing. And then, of course, we built new units. So in recent years, 734 new units Niagara Regional Housing has created. They also work with rent supplement agreements so that people can stay affordably housed in the unit they're already in. We don't actually have to wait to build a unit for that, which is really exciting. Niagara Regional Housing, I'm not sure how many people know about this, but has brought on a really cool, innovative project, which is to have a project manager who works at Niagara Regional Housing and supports affordable housing projects across Niagara, often helping them get ready to look for federal dollars or other financing and to get the planning of their project done, because a lot of nonprofits and nonprofit housing operators don't have the capacity to do that work up front like maybe a private sector would. Niagara Regional Housing, I've only got a couple more I want to brag about, but Niagara Regional Housing also has a great project in Hawkins Street development in Niagara Falls right now. It's about 25% complete, and that's going to have about 73 units of community housing coming at the beginning of 2022, and 10 of those will be assigned for people that are coming through supportive housing, our Housing First program. And then I guess another thing that was just in the news this week that's super exciting, fits with Built for Zero and all of this, is that Niagara Regional Housing and the Niagara Region and the City of Niagara Falls have announced a great partnership to do a bridge housing project. And that project, this is a first for the Niagara Region, where we're going to be working to help people who are exiting hospital, healthcare, who have maybe needs beyond what our shelter system could support on its own. There'll be some primary care there, and it's going to have 21 beds to support people to move into permanent housing and 3 recuperative care beds. So there's some really, really exciting initiatives going on, and I get really stoked about this kind of stuff. Of course, the key challenge is, some of these things take years to happen, and we have people in crisis right now that need short-term solutions. So, I don't want it to seem like we've got everything under wraps, because there's people who need things right now, and the timelines for these things don't necessarily work out to meet their needs.
Thanks, Jeff. There's some great stuff on the horizon. I wanted to just encourage folks to comment in the chat function with any questions that they might have. And I thought while we were waiting maybe for folks who were joining us tonight, that I would highlight some of the comments. So some of these obviously don't require an answer, but I did want to bring them to your attention. And so Rebecca shares, rental market now would have to pay 60 to 70% of take-home salary. This is on the lower end of the scale currently. I'm just going to keep highlighting maybe a few of these comments. And so Patrick mentioned using average market rent as a factor in the definition of affordable housing is very common, but it's extremely harmful and inaccurate. And Jeff, Elizabeth, Christina, feel free to chime in and comment on some of these.
I'll comment on that one, and it goes back to the film. That was a really good point. One of the things that we've done, why we've tied it to household income, a lot of times, and in the film you even see they really talk about the market as if it's disconnected. Affordability can be disconnected from households that need to afford it. And so we've done, some head scratching in Niagara a couple of years ago when we were trying to set this up and figure out how we were going to measure progress and make sure we were making a meaningful impact on the issue for households. And so the key really is attaching affordability to the, in the market, to the actual earnings of the households, and not just because if the entire market is really out of whack and really, really expensive, then, a certain percentage, saying affordable is 80% of the average market. If people can't afford anywhere near the average market, they also can't afford 80% of that market. So it's really important to attach it to household income.
Thanks, Jeff. Elizabeth, Christina, I'm not sure if you wanted to chime in on all of that one. I know there's a number of other comments. Sarah LK had a great question. Pardon me, a comment about asking what you were reading from, Christina, and I believe it was the United Nations description or definition of what a human right to housing is, but I wanted to make sure we answered that.
Sure. It was on the Ontario Human Rights Commission's website, and there was also a quote on there about the international law, and that was from April 12th of 2019.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then we had a question from Caitlin, and said her question is, why is the government not putting in rent controls and caps on exponentially rising rental and property costs? Should the government not be addressing this root cause of the issue? Elizabeth, not sure if you, or Jeff, I know it's a tough question to ask.
Actually, there are controls in the sense that you can only increase rent by a certain percentage annually. I think that the challenge is when people move out of rental, or the new terminology when we were talking about rent evictions, where people are, in a sense displaced from their housing because the landlord has decided to renovate and then increases the rent exponentially. I think there are measures being put in place to start to slow that that these things are happening. The other thing too, which speaks to the financialization of housing, is what Vancouver has done, or what British Columbia has done around taxation and for empty or vacant units. So there is that also. So there are things happening, but I think we need to pressure and keep on top to ensure that particularly in terms of rent controls, rent evictions, things like that, these kinds of laws do not shift.
Yes, and we've been experiencing that in Niagara for quite some time now. I just wanted to share a really great comment, Christina. Someone was giving you some kudos, so I thought I would point it out. Certainly your point about needing a solution to address the dream and moving to the next level is warranted. As you identified, you're not in an easy position, but you truly come across as a powerhouse with great analysis skills. Kudos to you and the community support. And I think I just wanted to share that, between United Way or the Niagara Poverty Reduction Network or the region, there are a lot of people who are sharing their voice, and it doesn't go unnoticed. So I encourage those that are commenting tonight and want to get involved to do so. I'm just going to maybe try to highlight a couple of more questions here. So Patrick has direct action targeting of bad landlords and property owners. Rent strikes, squatting, expropriations, and other creative actions can help us toward this end. And I just wondered maybe if there were some comments about what your thoughts were on this. Jeff, Elizabeth, you're probably on maybe different ends or the same ends, I'm not sure.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, so some of this we see in the film, where people are taking a stand by basically just taking over those financed, financialized properties that no one's living in, and there's blocks and blocks of them, say in London, England, I think it was. And so, from a government perspective, from the Niagara region, I can't really comment and encourage that kind of thing, but I think that it is really important that the community advocate and try to find ways to continue to raise awareness of the issue and share stories about how this impacts real people in our communities.
Thanks, Jeff. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I would agree with Jeff in that it's important for people to ensure their voices are heard. And as you already mentioned, Tamara, the Niagara Poverty Reduction Network is a great way to, get involved. I think that's an important piece. We also are fortunate to have institutions like the Landlord Tenant Board, where you can hold landlords accountable for what they're not doing. So I think that we do thankfully have a few mechanisms in place. That being said, it's not always adequate, and certainly being collective and gathering together and ensuring that there is a collective response, I think is always a good way of creating change.
Yeah, and if you happen to live in housing as well too, they also have like a tenancy association that you can also speak up and let your voice be heard as well. And there's also committees inside of complexes as well too that you can also speak with your committee and work together and somehow start a focus group as well and get together and speak to each other that way and get your voices out and get together collectively.
Thanks. I agree. There's a number of tables that would love to have people's voices added to inform the work in our region, and I highly encourage anyone to do so. There was a question here. Has the data Jeff cited accounted for the influx of income earners / households coming from outside of Niagara in recent years? And so that was about 5 minutes ago, Jeff, to give you context.
Yeah, so where this shows up, and again, when we're looking at the market, a lot of the discussion on the planning and on the economic side is around, how does supply and demand fit together so that we're supplying the mix of housing that our communities need. And we do have a bit of a distortion in the local market. All of the markets around the GTA do because of the effect that we see in the film, but the pressures from the Toronto market. And so what we've seen is we do have a lot of migration into the Niagara region. It tends to be wealthier households because their earnings are coming from work in the GTA. And so what happens then is that in order for the market to meet their demands, the market produces some fairly expensive housing. And of course, if you're living and working locally in a seasonal job, and then you're trying to figure out how do my partner and I, with our 2 kids, how do we get into the housing market? The new housing that's being built is just simply going to not be affordable for you. So a big part of it is just the way that the market works and the area we're in, and it's really hard to on the one hand, we do need a net migration into Niagara in order to fill jobs and new factories that are opening up. There's all sorts of really interesting stuff happening, and it's great to have more diversity in our communities. But at the same time, we do need to find ways to ensure that the people who do live here, especially I'm thinking of older adults who are already in Niagara, or younger, your kids are moving out of your house and want to get a house of their own in Niagara. How do we make sure that those types of households are able to still stay here as well?
Thank you. We have one question that I'm going to start to wrap things up. Fiona asks, can you comment on the landlord-tenant board performing unchallengeable 60-second evictions in the middle of a pandemic? Is this really a place where tenants' voices are heard? I'll leave it to anyone who wants to answer.
Well, as I said, it's not a perfect institution, and unfortunately things, can go still wrong. And these are complex issues, and I think it's still important for us as, community members to continue to advocate and advocate with our political officials too, to say, is this how these institutions are supposed to function? And also to bring forward and continue to bring forward the voice of those who are struggling with their housing. I think that from my perspective, I've been working in social services for a long time, and I'm encouraged by the amount of the platform that has increased and how much the voices of those who are experiencing housing challenges are being heard. But I think we have to continue to do that, and we have to continue to ensure that our governments are keeping this in the foreground. We now have a national housing strategy. This is something that has taken many, many years for us to have. We have governments that are talking about housing and homelessness and the affordability. So we have to continue to keep that pressure on. And if our institutions aren't working the way they need to, we also have to keep pressure on our elected officials to say that needs to be reevaluated.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Christina or Jeff, I'm not sure if you have any final comments on that question.
I just agree with Elizabeth. I mean, that's what your elected officials are for. And I mean, I would go towards them for representation as well, and just to back you. I mean, let your voice be heard, advocate on your behalf.
Thanks. Just going to share one comment. Sarah noted, thanks, Jeff, for acknowledging the point of migration and market pressures. And like you said, how we also need to take care for those still in Niagara, like the senior population. I'm just going to maybe ask one word from each of you. And so obviously, in order to continue to build on what is working in Niagara, we need collaboration and investment, not only in housing, but also people in our community. And so if we want our communities to be healthy and vibrant, what one thing do you think we could be doing in Niagara? And Elizabeth, I'm going to start with you.
Well, I think it is, it is keeping our voices, making sure our voices are heard. So that this issue doesn't get forgotten. It's an important issue. It affects the whole community. We need to make sure that it keeps up on the foreground.
Thank you. Christina, I'll go to you next.
I second what Elizabeth said, and definitely after the event is over, continue to reach out to any of us that are on the panel, as well as the different sites and links that are available for more information, and just find out where you can best get your information from, and how you can serve your community.
Jeff, one thing could we be doing in Niagara maybe that we're not?
Yeah, I think it also ties to listening to the voices of people, and it's inclusion. And I think we need to think of our communities about how do we include a variety of people that aren't necessarily like us, whether that's by income or any other criteria. I really think we need to address how we exclude people from being either housed in our communities, participating in our communities, and really embrace the variety of people that we have. So to me, that's a really big issue, and I think the lack of affordable housing stems out of a lack of inclusion.
Thanks, Jeff, for pointing that out. I highly agree. And so my job tonight is to moderate, and I'm actually going to end this evening with a comment that Caitlin Black shared, and she says, "It can't happen soon enough. Please push this forward. People's lives depend on it." And I really think that kind of sums up everything that we wanted to discuss tonight. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to, at this time, hand it back over to the Niagara Poverty Reduction Network Vice Chair Jennifer Gauthier. Hi, Jen. I'm going to interrupt you so rudely because all of the wonderful things that you're saying right now, no one can hear. I need you to unmute yourself and maybe just start fresh.
Oh, thank you, Tamara. Sorry about that. Thank you, Christina, Elizabeth, and Jeff, for your expert insights into the issue of homelessness and access to affordable and equitable housing here in Niagara. We greatly appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge this evening and for the extensive work you do on a daily basis to make Niagara a safer and more inclusive community. On behalf of Niagara Poverty Reduction Network, I would like to thank everyone in attendance for your shared interests, questions, and perspectives. I welcome everyone to learn more about the network and the current work being done by our communities in the areas of affordable housing, health equity, social assistance, and advocating for a living wage. We work on these interrelated issues to create a more equitable and inclusive community, and we greatly appreciate support from allies as we move forward. If you are interested in joining us in our work or have questions, please visit our website or reach out through email at info@wipeoutpoverty.ca. Thank you again for your participation and joining us on National Housing Day. I hope the film Push and the remarks from the panelists tonight inspire you to take action and join us in our work to make change here in Niagara. Take care, stay safe, and be well. Good night.